I recently read 2 books that went together so well and complemented each other so beautifully that I just really wanted to chat about them. One of them was A Wild Way, How Gardens Grow Us by Poppy Okotcha. It's a book about gardening and it's very, very practical. It goes through the instructions and the guides of how to manage a garden through the year organically and using concepts of permaculture. But it's always got an eye on the spiritual and the political. It's very much looking at the wider implications of gardening in the world today. And she draws on folklore from her 2 heritages, Nigerian and British, so that it is very much about sort of your inner world too. And then the second book is Häxans Handbok till revolutionen by Elin Bååth, this very tatty library copy. And this one is kind of like the opposite of that. It's about the spiritual, it's about the political and magic and witchcraft and how we can use that to make real meaningful change in the world today. But likewise, it's always got a hand in the earth, you know, little things about gardening or foraging or just how to use this isn't the right word, honor nature. And so, yeah, looking at spirituality and seasonality and working with the earth and change and living with this time that we're in of climate and environmental crisis is just so perfectly what I'm interested in. And it brought up a lot of ideas that I felt like chatting about. Normally I script my videos quite carefully. I have like carefully thought out red threads. For this one, I felt more like just having a chat with you, just, you know, talking about books. I mean, I have written some bullet points because if there's one thing I know how to do, is how to yap. And I think editing this is going to be quite difficult and I'm probably going to have to cut out a lot. But yeah, I just wanted to have a bit more of a casual vibe. So if you want to join me on the like autumn vibes, grab a cup of tea. I've got goldenrod. That's still very hot. Actually, if you don't want to know what goldenrod is, this is goldenrod, foraged from the very far away fields of the bottom of my garden. And it is honestly one of my favorite smells in the entire world. It's a mix of kind of honey, chamomile, and just a touch of rose. And I just think it is one of the sweetest smelling flowers and really good for treating inflammation. I also really wanted to talk about these 2 books right now because it's autumn. Autumn is possibly more so than spring. You're really aware of the year changing. And here, the fresh, lovely part of autumn with the blue skies and crisp air and golden treetops, that's unfortunately pretty much over now. It's all the leaves are on the ground and slowly turning into mush. The sense of winter coming and the darkness coming, it's really, really in the air. And I have a lot of thoughts about how we treat seasons and time and nature, because I actually wrote my master's thesis on how we understand time and nature. And I think something I particularly think a lot about is how we demonize winter. We really dread the coming of winter. That's such a problem because, you know, winter is a quarter of our lives. And so if we spend a quarter of our lives just waiting for summer, that's not good for our well-being. It's like the whole thing of don't live for the weekend. Obviously, one of the key problems with how we handle winter in modern society is that we just don't have space for it in the way that we used to. For most of human history, we've had to pay attention to things like the dark in the winter because it was expensive to work in the dark because candles were expensive. So, you know, when it started getting darker, when the days got shorter and things weren't growing anymore, well, the work slowed down, you know. People's lives were a lot more tied to the seasons. But now we've got so used to electric light and just being able to ignore the darkness and ignore the cold winter. And instead, we've got this society that insists that we work 9 to 5 every day, all year round. When you think about it, it's kind of crazy. We are still animals. We are still biological. Our most ancient ancestor, the bugs that came crawling out of the sea, their DNA was built around cycles, the daily cycles, the lunar cycles, and the seasons. And now we're trying to live in a society, in a life where we completely ignore that. And what also strikes me is that we work like it's summer all year round. It's not like we've brought on lots of rest. We have this sort of high work pattern that you would normally only have seen in summer, and now we're expected to do it in the winter. And I genuinely think it's a big reason why so many people get so depressed over winter, because we're being forced to live like it's summer, even though it's dark and it's cold and all we want to do is huddle in a pile of blankets. And both of these books that I'm talking about today, they both resist this dominant culture of consistent working, and they really encourage you towards having a much more rhythmical life. And both books are in fact structured around the cycle of the year. In a wilder way, each chapter is titled for the month of the year. You get all of the recipes and the instructions, as well as, the way of thinking. Like in the winter months, you've just got to be patient and take a step back and take some rest. And then in the summer, there's more stuff to do. And similarly, in Häxans Handbok, this one is also designed around the wheel of the year. You might have heard of Sabbats, Litha, Lammas, Mabon, Samhain. These are the same times of year. She's got the 8, but instead of naming them after those quite common Celtic things, she talks about the different powers of the years, the time of the power of the wind, the seed, the fire, the love. Right now, we're in the time Mörkret, the dark, or otherwise known as Samhain, and these are based around the solstices and the equinoxes and the midpoints between those times. And so likewise, Elin structures the book, and she goes through different rituals and different things to be thinking about politically, but also spiritually and in your inner self, in line with the rhythms of the year. And I don't think either author, and also me included in this, think that it's easy to live this rhythmical life when we're in a society that really just doesn't allow for that. Both authors are encouraging you to find these rhythms in parts of your life. What's really interesting about Poppy is that she used to be a fast fashion model, and then she really had a revolution within herself in terms of finding this more sustainable way of life and getting into gardening. And she says how she used to travel so much part of her job. She used to think that she'd find the magic out there, and it wasn't until she really stayed in one place, got to know the local ecosystem and the local soil and the local climate. And it wasn't even just that she found the magic out there. It meant that she found the magic, the way she phrased it was that she found the magic in her own bones, and how that comes about when you get to see a place changing day by day and year by year. Both authors are, in one way or another, talking about revolution and really seriously revolutionizing the way that we live and changing the fundamental values of how we live in our societies. But then one particular thing that I think both of them draw attention to, when we fail to follow the seasons, when we don't let the natural changes and cycles go in our life, there's this denial of the dark. That's a nice phrase, isn't it? The denial of the dark. I don't know, it might even be the title of an upcoming EP. I don't know. You'll have to wait and see. But anyway, denial of the dark. And what do I mean by that? I'm talking about denial as a bit like when you're grieving and the denial stage of grief. It's denying that it's there, denying the truth of it. There are so many ways that we deny the dark when we don't pay attention to seasons. But it's also about denying the uncomfortable in life, denying suffering. And Elin talks about how the denial of suffering is kind of the root of our problems in this society that is built upon so much injustice and exploitation. It's the fact that we're pretending that we don't see that half the things that we own are made by people who have been exploited, denying and ignoring the atrocities that are happening in the world. Well, that's what allows those atrocities to continue. That's what means that the suffering continues, is that we pretend it's not there. So she talks about acceptance. She's drawing it very heavily from Buddhism. Acceptance not as a passive thing, but as a radical tool for change. I think I'm actually going to find the quote because she says it better than me. Begreppet avser att se en situation precis som den är, utan att blunda för det som är obehagligt. Och är inte bristen på den här sortens acceptans precis det som är roten till världens problem? Är inte människors förnekande av lidandet det som gör det orättvisa och ohållbara samhället möjligt? Acceptans, som är att se verkligheten helt klart och osminkat, är motsatsen till förnekelse och därmed grunden till all förändring. And I think Poppy talks about this a lot as well, because she's really looking at growing food. When she's talking about gardening, she is talking about a very practical way of gardening, of trying to be more self-sufficient. And she talks about the lack of awareness that we have about where our food comes from. You know, we don't know the soil where it was grown. We don't know the hands that plucked it. And something she draws attention to at the end of the book is seed sovereignty. If you've ever grown a plant that goes to seed, you know how many seeds a single plant can create. Like, plants are so generous, they proliferate so much, and it can be so easy to grow more. And yet capitalism has designed this system where seeds are now patented and farmers have to buy seeds that have been genetically modified to be infertile so that they can't just keep the seed of the crop again. No, instead they have to keep buying more seeds. They're so integrated in the human way of life and they're so naturally generous, and yet capitalism has come along and taken it and made it something that is a business model. And the fact that these injustices are happening and that is the base of our food system is a real problem. And of course what she does is she presents gardening as the counter to that, because gardening can really be a way to connect with the dark in quite a literal way. You get your hands in the dark soil, in fermented yucky things and worms, like these dark, disgusting, uncomfortable things that we don't generally like to think about or touch. And gardening gets you in there and like realizing actually how beautiful it is as a process. And then on a more abstract level, she talks about how gardening gets you in contact with the darkness of, well, perhaps it's not the darkness of these things, but it's darkness that tends to require these things like patience and rest and having to just wait and see and trust that the seeds under the earth are growing. It's understanding that the dark is actually a place for growth, not something to be feared. So that brings me quite neatly actually onto the third thing that I wanted to talk about, which is revolution. I think I'm just going to quote Elin again. She writes really, really beautifully. But yeah, she talks about this connection of embracing the dark and how that is actually a really key part of the revolution. She's talking about how one of the key things that we need to change, our dualistic worldview, where we see nature as something else and other people as something else, and these like dividing lines between subject and object and who has power and who doesn't have power. For me, handlar den I have this issue where I can't actually say the word revolution in Swedish. I don't know why. Revolutionen. Revolutionen. I'm just going to go for it. För mig handlar den revolutionen i grunden att lämna den dualistiska världsbilden och återvända till det urgamla kretslopp som är allas vår födslorätt. För i naturens berättelse finns det ingen dualism, bara den mullrande mångfald. Där finns ingen linjer med början och slut, utan bara kretslopp, där mörker, kyla och död varken är onda eller goda. Dessa krafter kan vara skrämmande och till och med smärtsamma, men är fortfarande precis lika nödvändiga som ljuset, värmen och livet. Poppy also talks about this in a very practical way. She doesn't like the word sustainability, and I think I kind of agree with her. I do use it because it's kind of the buzzword for this sort of topic, and I think it's the word that people are familiar with. But there are problems with the word sustainability because we don't actually want to sustain this way of life. I've talked before about how the people who are probably going to be watching this video, the people who are kind of on my level in society, we might not feel that rich, but actually globally we can't sustain the way of life that we currently have. It's not sustainable. It's not good for the earth. It's not good for the planet. It's not good for people. It is not possible for us to greenify our current culture. So what Poppy prefers is regeneration, that we should be aiming to have a regenerative culture, not a sustainable one. She talks about this in a very practical sense of compost. Compost is made up of waste, like things that we don't like, the dirty, the dark. And then you put it in the right conditions and it turns into something utterly amazing that is super nutritious and can grow new life. That's something I really want to explore on this channel. You know, those fundamental values that we have, those fundamental ideas. I could talk about, oh yeah, get this bamboo toothbrush instead of a plastic one. And that's all well and good, but I really want to be talking about like the really deep shit. I like getting into I actually always mean that quite literally, like the shit, the crap of our world, the waste of our world. Let's get into it and see what compost we can make. And I think these books talking about revolution have been particularly powerful to read right now because of everything that's happening in the world. Certain people deciding to take down democracy, protest being cracked down upon, certain palaces in the world experiencing extreme oppression. It feels really scary. It feels really painful when I look at all of the crises that are happening in the world at the moment. But in this crazy way, it's actually giving me a kind of hope at the same time. The people in power would not be trying so hard to oppress us if they weren't scared. If they felt comfortable in their seats of power, if they felt like there wasn't any problems and they could just stay where they were, then they wouldn't be having to try so hard. But instead, there's governments all around the world, and it varies in severity, but everything from banning protest and cracking down and changing laws that limit freedoms, all the way up to trying to get rid of an entire group of people. This is the scary, unfortunate truth of revolution, is the painful change that comes first. And actually, I'm going to quote Elin again here, because she talks a lot about the violence that is inevitable and the pain that is inevitable in revolution, both within ourselves, but also in society on a wider scale. Ordet revolutionen betyder som sagt egentligen kretslopp. Och även om det kan vara smärtsamt och konfliktfyllt, är processen att dö och återfödas, släpper taget om något gammalt och låter något nytt skapas, en av naturens mest grundläggande processer. And something I'm particularly interested in, and I've talked about it before in my Earth Care, Self-Care video, is that the personal changes and the inner changes, that inner work, call it shadow work if you want to, is as necessary and is as painful as the wider processes of change that we need to see in society. Witchcraft can often be criticized for being quite individualistic, not looking at the wider context, but Elin is so rooted. I mean, she actually even has a whole section in the book where she really criticizes the whole concept of manifestation. She's like, manifestation is fine. If you want to manifest things, that's fine. But like, stop thinking you can fix everything just within yourself and all love and light and everything's going to be great in the world. Like, no, you do need to be out there resisting Nazis. You do need to be out there doing the political work. You do need to make sure that you are decolonizing yourself. Like, I'm currently reading the Mörkret chapter, the one about the power of the dark. She goes through processes of how can you decolonize your brain? How can you become awareness of the privileges that you have in your shadows that you're maybe not aware of? This is why it's such a brilliant take on witchcraft, because it's not any of this like hyper individualistic, strengthening yourself kind of thing. I mean, it is about strengthening yourself, but it's always with this awareness of the wider context. I am someone who works a lot with spirituality. I have found it really, really powerful, and it's taught me a lot. But it's important that if you only do spirituality and you don't think about the outer impact, if you only look to heal yourself and do nothing to heal the atrocities of the world, I think most people can see that that's hypocritical maybe. It's very individualistic. It's kind of actually just a recreation of the capitalist world that we have. But at the same time, if you only do politics, if you're only going out and doing marches and only ever trying to influence society, but you don't think about your inner processes, you don't think about your fundamental values, the dark inner work that you need to go through, well, then there's actually going to be a serious limit to the liberation that you can create, because the revolution has only gone so far. You need to have the revolution both within yourself and out in the world. I have now yapped for quite a while, so I think I will draw this to a close with a question for you. How are you feeling about the coming winter? Are you feeling ready? Are you looking forward to those cozy dark nights, or are you feeling a bit scared? I have to say, this year I'm not actually feeling that ready for the winter, because I feel like I spent a lot of time indoors this summer, and now it's dark at 5 p.m. and I'm like, no, I haven't had enough sunshine yet. I can't blame the winter for what happened in the summer. If I approach winter as something I've got to survive, as something negative, I'm going to have a miserable time. So I think I'm going to be exploring a lot of spirituality this winter. That's my hope. Kind of left it for a while. I've been really feeling drawn back into some introspective work and spiritual work. But let me know how you feel about your coming winter. I've normally scripted a really lovely ending to my videos, and now I don't know how to finish. We'll finish with a slurp of tea. If you've got your tea, then let's have a little slurp together. Oh, that is so nice. Okay, I'm going to stop yapping now. Have a lovely winter.